The greatest fear of an empath is not feeling too little. It is feeling too much and losing control. So you build walls. You pretend not to notice. You disconnect from your inner voice. But the truth is this: your fear is not of your empathy. Your fear is not of your power. Because true empathy is not weakness. It is perception sharpened to a blade. And when you stop suppressing it, you begin to see through illusions in relationships, in conversations, in yourself. That kind of sight is dangerous, not to you, but to the masks around you. The empath is often seen as light, compassionate, intuitive, emotionally attuned. But beneath that light exists a shadow that few dare to acknowledge. This shadow is not evil, nor is it broken. It is the unexpressed anger, the hidden resentment, the suppressed needs, and the quiet rage that builds when empathy is given without balance. Many empaths grow up learning that their role is to feel for others. They become emotional translators in chaotic households, peacekeepers in tense environments, absorbers of unspoken pain. Over time, they identify with the image of being the understanding one, the mature one, the strong one. But this identity comes at a cost. Because when you are always the understanding one who understands you, the shadow forms in the spaces where your own emotions were dismissed. Each time you swallowed your anger to keep the peace. Each time you said, it's okay, when it wasn't. Each time you tolerated behavior that wounded you because you could see the other person's pain behind it. Empaths often confuse explanation with justification. They understand why someone hurt them, and in that understanding, they abandon themselves. The shadow of the empath is the part that is tired of being compassionate without reciprocity. It is the part that feels the injustice but says nothing. It is the part that secretly longs to say no without guilt, to walk away without explaining, to prioritize itself without being labeled selfish. But because empaths fear becoming cold or cruel, they repress this shadow. They push down anger because it feels incompatible with love. They suppress boundaries because it feels incompatible with kindness. They silence instinct because it feels incompatible with being good. Yet what is repressed does not disappear, it transforms. It may show up as passive aggression, a sudden emotional withdrawal, as unexplained exhaustion, as resentment that leaks through tone and body language. The empath who refuses to confront their shadow often becomes overwhelmed, not because they feel too much, but because they refuse to honor what they feel. The shadow also contains power hidden within suppressed anger, hidden within suppressed anger. Within resentment is truth about violated boundaries. Within jealousy is information about unfulfilled desires. When an empath denies these emotions, they deny the guidance embedded within them. To integrate the shadow is not to become harsh, it is to become honest. It means admitting that you sometimes feel anger, that you sometimes don't want to understand, that you sometimes want to choose yourself without considering everyone else first. It means acknowledging that compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure. An integrated empath does not lose their warmth, they refine it. They no longer give from obligation, but from choice. They no longer confuse self-sacrifice with love. They allow anger to inform them instead of control them. They recognize that saying no can be an act of integrity, not aggression. The shadow is not the opposite of your empathy. It is the guardian of it. So when you face it, you stop being a sponge for the world's pain. You stop over identifying with the role of healer. You begin to feel your own emotional landscape with the same depth you once reserved only for others. And in that confrontation, something shifts inside you. One of the greatest struggles an empath faces is not simply feeling deeply, it is distinguishing what belongs to them and what does not. In our world saturated with unspoken emotions, subtle tensions, and unconscious patterns, the empath becomes highly attuned to atmospheres. They sense shifts before words are spoken. They detect discomfort behind smiles. They absorb energy without permission. But here lies the hidden complexity. Not everything you feel is yours. Projection is a psychological process in which individuals disown parts of themselves and unconsciously assign them to others. Anger that someone refuses to acknowledge in themselves may be perceived as hostility in you. Insecurity they cannot face may be interpreted as judgment coming from your silence. Unresolved guilt may transform into blame directed outward. The empath, because of heightened sensitivity, often becomes the canvas upon which others project their hidden emotions. If you are not aware of this dynamic, you begin to internalize what was never yours to carry. You start questioning your tone, your expression, your intentions. You overanalyze interactions. You assume responsibility for discomfort in the room. Because you can feel the emotional charge, you conclude that you must have caused it. The ability to sense becomes distorted into the belief that you are responsible for fixing. This is where emotional boundaries become essential. Boundaries become essential. It is a filter. It is the inner awareness that says, I can perceive your emotion without absorbing it. Without this boundary, empathy turns into enmeshment. You do not just understand others, you merge with them. Their anxiety becomes your anxiety, their anger becomes your self-doubt, their confusion becomes your mental fog. Projection thrives when boundaries are weak. For example, someone carrying unacknowledged anger may accuse you of being distant or cold when you simply withdraw to process your thoughts. If you lack boundaries, you will scramble to prove warmth. You will overextend yourself to dissolve their discomfort. But if you are grounded, you will pause and ask, is this truly mine? This question is powerful. It interrupts the automatic impulse to take responsibility for everything you sense. It allows you to observe without immediately reacting. Healthy emotional boundaries require self trust. You must trust your internal experience more than external accusations. You must recognize that being sensitive does not make you guilty. You must understand that someone else's discomfort is not evidence of your wrongdoing. For many empaths, this is uncomfortable. They fear being perceived as indifferent. They equate boundaries with rejection. But boundaries are not rejection, they are differentiation. They clarify where you end and another begins. You become the emotional regulator for everyone around you. You feel compelled to soothe, mediate, repair, and over time, exhaustion replaces compassion. When you strengthen emotional boundaries, your empathy becomes sharper rather than heavier. You still perceive subtle cues, but you no longer come into them. You can witness anger without becoming defensive. You can witness sadness without drowning. You can witness projection without accepting its narrative, projecting its narrative, projecting, projecting, personalize what is not yours. And in that refusal, your sensitivity transforms from vulnerability into discernment, bitterheid, discernment, bitterheid, as desensitivity is often misunderstood as fragility. From childhood, many sensitive individuals are told to toughen up, to stop overreacting, to not take things so personally. Over time, they begin to see their emotional depth as a flaw that needs correction. They attempt to harden themselves, to numb their reactions, to blend into environments that reward detachment over awareness, that sensitivity is not a weakness to overcome. It is a compass pointing toward individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Individuation begins when you stop shaping yourself according to external expectations and start listening to your internal signals. Sensitivity sharpens those signals. Sensitivity sharpens those signals. You notice when something feels off in a conversation. You sense misalignment in relationships long before it becomes visible. You feel the subtle dissonance between what is said and what is meant. These perceptions are not inconveniences, they are guidance. The sensitive person stands at the crossroads early in life. One path leads to adaptation, silencing intuition to gain acceptance. The other leads to authenticity, honoring perception even when it isolates you. Most choose adaptation at first. It feels safer. Belonging is a powerful instinct. So you learn to suppress your discomfort, to laugh at what unsettles you, to stay in spaces that drain you, because leaving would cause conflict. But suppressed sensitivity does not disappear. It turns inward, it becomes anxiety, overthinking, self doubt. You start questioning your instincts, You distrust your reactions. You wonder whether you are imagining things. The more you override your inner signals, the more fragmented you feel. Individuation demands that you reverse this pattern. It requires you to treat your sensitivity as information rather than inconvenience. When you feel tension in a relationship, you explore it instead of dismissing it. When you sense manipulation, you examine the pattern instead of excusing it. When your body tightens certain environments, you ask why instead of forcing yourself to endure. Through this process, sensitivity becomes a tool for differentiation. You begin to distinguish between what aligns with you and what does not. You recognize that not every space deserves your presence. Not every connection deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your internalization. This clarity can be uncomfortable. Individuation often brings loneliness before it brings empowerment. As you honor your sensitivity, you may outgrow dynamics that once defined you. You may stop playing roles that kept others comfortable. You may become less agreeable, less accommodating, less willing to betray your inner truth. But something else emerges in place of approval, integrity. When sensitivity is integrated, it no longer controls you. It refines you. It deepens your creativity, sharpens your perception, strengthens your discernment. You stop reacting impulsively to every emotional wave and start interpreting what those waves reveal about your environment and your own psyche. You begin to trust yourself. Trust transforms sensitivity from burden to foundation. Instead of asking, what will they think? You begin asking, what feels true? Instead of shrinking to avoid discomfort, you allow discomfort to signal growth. Instead of seeking validation for your perceptions, you quietly observe and adjust your path accordingly. Individuation through sensitivity is not about becoming harder, it is about becoming whole. There is a certain type of person who seems to understand pain without needing explanation. They recognize the tremor in someone's voice, the heaviness behind forced laughter, the silence that speaks louder than words. They are often the ones others turn to in crisis. Calm in chaos, steady in storms, deeply compassionate. Yet behind this capacity to heal lies a hidden truth. Their ability was forged in their own suffering. The wounded healer archetype represents the paradox that personal pain can become the foundation for profound insight. Those who embody it did not study suffering from a distance. They lived it. Rejection, betrayal, neglect, abandonment, invisibility, these experiences carved depth into their perception. While others moved through life untouched by certain emotional extremes, the wounded healer was shaped by them. Early wounds often create hyper awareness. A child who grows up in instability learns to read moods for survival. A person who has been misunderstood becomes highly attuned to subtle shifts in tone. Trauma sharpens perception. What begins as a coping mechanism evolves into intuitive sensitivity. But there is a shadow side to this archetype. Many wounded healers unconsciously try to repair others in order to avoid confronting their own unresolved pain. Helping becomes a distraction. Fixing becomes a way to feel valuable. They may attract relationships that replicate old wounds because those dynamics feel familiar. They overextend themselves emotionally, believing their worth lies in how much they can endure. This pattern creates exhaustion. When healing other becomes an identity, it becomes difficult to ask for help. The wounded healer may feel strong for everyone else but alone in their own vulnerability. They may minimize their struggles because they are accustomed to being the stable one. Over time, compassion without self-compassion leads to depletion. True transformation begins when the wounded healer turns inward, instead of using empathy to escape their own pain, they begin to face it. They examine the original wounds, not to relive them, but to understand them. They acknowledge anger that was suppressed, grief that was postponed, fear that was masked by strength. In doing so, they shift from unconscious healing to conscious integration. So integration changes everything. When you heal from awareness rather than compulsion, you no longer need others to be broken in order to feel purposeful. You do not see projects disguised as partners. You do not confuse chaos with chemistry. Your empathy becomes grounded instead of frantic. The wound itself transforms. What once felt like a scarlet letter becomes a source of wisdom. You understand boundaries because you once lacked them. You recognize manipulation because you once endured it. You offer compassion without rescuing, guidance without controlling, presence without losing yourself. But the wounded healer does not erase their past. They metabolize it. Pain becomes perspective, vulnerability becomes strength, experience becomes discernment. They no longer bleed for others. They teach from scars that have closed. Their presence carries weight, not because they are perfect, but because they are integrated. In this archetype lies a profound truth. Your deepest wounds can become your greatest insight, but only when you choose to heal yourself as intentionally as you once tried to heal everyone else. Detachment is often misunderstood. It is mistaken for indifference, coldness, or emotional withdrawal. For sensitive individuals, especially those who feel deeply and care intensely, the idea of detachment can feel threatening. They fear that to detach is to stop loving, to stop caring, to become distant from the very qualities that define them. But conscious detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of it. Unconscious attachment binds your emotional state to circumstances you cannot control. It ties your peace to someone else's approval. It ties your stability to how others behave. It ties your self-worth to how much you are needed. When attachment operates unconsciously, you react automatically. Someone withdraws and you panic. Someone criticizes and you collapse inward. Someone changes, and you scramble to fix what may not be yours to fix. Conscious detachment interrupts this reflex. It creates space between what happens and how you respond. It allows you to witness emotions without being consumed by them. You still feel disappointment, anger, or sadness, but you are not defined by them. You observe the emotion as information rather than identity. For many empaths, attachment forms through over identification. You merge with the emotional states of others. If they are anxious, you feel anxious. If they are upset, you feel responsible. If they are distant, you feel rejected. This fusion blurs boundaries and erodes individuality. Over time, you begin to lose clarity about where you end and another begins. Conscious detachment restores that clarity. It is the inner decision to remain connected without becoming entangled. You care, but you do not cling. You love, but you do not control. You support, but you do not sacrifice your stability to maintain someone else's comfort. You allow others to experience the consequences of their choices without rushing to shield them from discomfort. This form of detachment, it demands that you tolerate emotional maturity. It demands that you tolerate uncertainty. You cannot force someone to understand you. You cannot make someone heal. You cannot guarantee permanence in relationships. Conscious detachment accepts these realities without shutting down, accepting down. There is strength in allowing Batarin to misunderstand you without over explaining, allowing dynamics to shift without chasing, allowing endings without dramatic resistance. When you detach consciously, you release the illusion that you can manage every outcome through effort. This does not mean passivity. It means alignment. You act where you have agency. You communicate clearly. You express boundaries, but you do not obsess over controlling the response. You understand that your responsibility lies in your actions, not in how others interpret them. Detachment also protects empathy from becoming self-destruction. When you detach consciously, you can sit with someone's pain without absorbing it. You can listen without internalizing blame. You can care deeply while remaining grounded in your own center. It is a shift from emotional reactivity to emotional sovereignty. You anchor yourself internally. There, being pulled by every external current, you anchor yourself internally. You remain present, but not possessed. You stay open, but not porous. You choose connection, but you no longer fear standing alone. And in that choice, your love becomes freer, your presence steadier, and your peace less negotiable.